Hey guys, Lancer here. Hope everyone's doing well. Thanks again for joining me while we look into some MTG Stonks. Pretty much I'm going to try to go through what the world is looking like right now and if we can figure out exactly what kind of a definition we can give to the current market situation. Now this applies to, I guess, collectibles in general and reserve list cards and maybe even magic cards in general because of the way that inflation and deflation and interest rates and dollar value all of that work together. So we'll have to see exactly what the future might hold. I'm going to go through a couple of different options, especially for today. And the plan is to just make a series for each of these and figure out exactly what might happen in the future. This is not financial advice, so let's have some fun. So the first thing I want to point to is the Fear and Greed Index. The Fear and Greed Index is a good way to check the sentiment of the markets in general. This is usually the stock market because it's way more liquid. And right now it's probably about as neutral as it's been for the last month. That's crazy. It is important to remember that last year, this time would have been an amazing time to buy because it hit a fear of 9. So it can drop. Depends on what the Federal Reserve does. It can go up. Depends on Federal Reserve as well. It really does. So the definition that I want to talk to about today is biflation. So biflation is the idea of both simultaneous inflation and deflation in the economy. And it really is based on a type of Cantalon effect, which I really want to look into. So the Cantalon effect is widely credited as the first to show the changes in the money supply and the credit and have important impacts on the economy by changing relative prices. So Cantalon was a guy. He apparently died in mysterious circumstances, but he made a lot of money before that. Most importantly, he figured out how the markets can sometimes work, especially when there's money supply increased. He showed that an increase in the supply of money could cause economic expansion, but that ultimately the process would be self-reversing as prices would rise and imports would increase, sending money back out of the economy. So the idea is when you increase money supply and prices increase, then those prices absorb that money supply, which means at some point the prices should stabilize and then maybe even decrease a bit. That hasn't happened in a long time just because of the expansion system and what we've been doing, at least the Federal Reserve and the governments. But we'll have to see exactly how that works in the long term. Cantalon effects are the real fundamental changes in the resources allocations that result from changing relative prices between the time of creation of new money and the full adjustment to the increase in supply. Pretty cool. For Cantalon, an increase in commodity money such as silver would increase employment and prices. It would impose forced savings and lower real incomes on those whose incomes was not changed due to monetary inflation, possibly leading to unemployment and emigration, leaving the country. If the money supply increased due to a balance of payment surplus, then the additional money would cause an increase in manufacturing or expansion in whatever the new money holders choose to spend their money on. So whoever has the money gets to choose what increases in value. It's a really interesting way to look at it, but it pretty much means that everyone in the world has an impact on the money, not just the rich. In fact, unemployment is one of the most important things. If you start getting paid more, that's when interest rates can actually increase consistently, because that will cause inflation generally. In response to the changing in relative prices, more resources are allocated to long-term capital goods. Unlike other aspects of the self-adjusting market process, such as money, land, labor, and short-term or intermediate capital goods, these resources become suspended or fixed in long-term fixed capital goods. These resources become formulated in a highly specific capital good that may not be well suited to alternative production process of the post-adjustment economy. It's all a bit complicated, but it's meant to be a way to separate between inflation, deflation, and what actually absorbs the money. To the extent that these types of adjustments are widespread, they pose a threat to the capital markets and the banking system. So, what are the key takeaways for biflation? Biflation is one of the big things that could happen in an economy which has two separate kinds of inflation and deflation. Biflation is the apparent simultaneous occurrence of inflation-deflation in the economy. It is a type of Cantalon effect that tends to occur when monetary stimulus is applied to revive an economy, exactly what's happening around the world now. Biflation involves the simultaneous decline in prices for debit pay-based assets such as home mortgages and related securities, along with an increased trend in commodity-based assets. So there's a decent amount of information in this. I'll see if I can find a good example. Biflation is a specific type of Cantalon effect. It happens when During a period of debit deflation, the central banks pump money into the economy in an attempt to reinflate asset prices that benefit. However, despite the central bank's effort, the recipients of the newly created money use it to purchase commodities and related assets rather than to try fighting the ongoing deflationary trend in the debit markets. The central bank's effort to stimulate the can not only fail, but instead can result in a rise of costs of living as prices of raw materials and consumer staples may rise, similar to effects of stagflation. In a depressed economy, demand for raw materials used to make things such as energy, clothing, and food will remain relatively high because they are deemed essential purchases by consumers. People will often buy them regardless of the price rises, leaving consumers with less money or discretionary expenses. Leverage assets like real estate are susceptible to experiencing price decreases in such environments. When economic growth is stagnant and unemployment increases, people cannot justify buying a home and anything else that is expensive and deemed to be non-essential, even if low interest rates. A key function of increasing the money supply make it cheaper to borrow. The upshoot of a strong appetite for certain assets and weak demand for others is biflation. Sudden prices are rising in one part of the economy and falling another, giving the appearance of mixture of inflation deflation. This is probably a perfect example of what can and will happen if we ever go down this path, because I can see it happening right now where we have copper, lumber and all these other commodities that are rising in prices. So during 2000, oh yeah, that's a perfect example. During the Great Recession of 2007-2009, which was impact around the world, like Australia got away with it mostly because of the spending boost from China and even mostly from China actually, against a backdrop of high unemployment and a moribund, I don't know what that means, housing sector, the Federal Reserve unleashed trillions of dollars in monetary stimulus to jumpstart the economy while pledging to keep interest rates low. To be sure, these measures aided parts of the economy, albeit not immediately across the board. Rather than targeting the funding towards renewed lending to distressed businesses, for instance, banks and Wall Street institutions who received the new money first held much of the funding as cash and or directed into speculative asset classes. What's going on now? Banks actually hold a lot more of the money that the Federal Reserve sends out, and everyone thinks. Housing prices eventually recovered, but not nearly as quickly as liquid assets such as stocks, which attracted investors due to recovery in corporate earnings fueled by low interest rates. If interest rates rise because of inflation fears, then there's a very high chance that things could actually go backwards then. The economy saw ongoing decline in sectors such as housing prices, which fell in many regions until early. This is in the US, but it actually worked around the world as well. Don't underestimate the impact. Until early 2012. Conversely, prices for gasoline rose from 2009 through 2012, from gold 2009 through to 2012 as well. So I think one of the most important things to remember is when biflation happens, a lot of the times commodities will increase in value while assets can sometimes decrease in value. They deflate, while commodities that get used up because of expansions from other countries will inflate. What we're saying right now, which I'll just jump to if I can, is if you go down and check out copper is a commodity. It has gone up like crazy right now, and it's gone a bit of a dive, but this is nothing. It's in the days, so this is nothing. The only thing I can think about is if I go to the weekly, does it show any signs of weakness? Not really, although that is actually quite a bit of a turnaround candle right there, where it's very indecisive on exactly what it wants to do. But if you look at a value like this and then you go and check out the dollar, which has dropped in value, the one thing that you can always tell is if things go back to normal, then the dollar will strengthen and commodities will fall. But if biflation happens, then pretty much it means commodities will continue increasing price, like oil and copper, while the dollar will keep dropping in price because they are still printing money and putting it into the system, which, circle it all the way back, means reserveless cards might have spiked a bit too aggressively. Who knows? But if the Federal Reserve and the governments around the world central banks continue to pump money into people's hands and the economy in general, they will eventually end up in collectibles, cards, houses, assets, so on and so forth, because they have nowhere else to go, and then they will draw liquidity out because then they get locked up in those kinds of assets. Like if I paid $30 for a dual land, a bad land, is there any time when it would have cost $30? Sure. In 2012, I guess? $47 for a dual land? Nice. So, okay, yeah, there you go. You got a $47 dual land. That means that I would have had more money in 2013 after I bought this dual land to spend into other places in the economy. But if I bought it for $375 now, that money is now being absorbed by this asset, collectible, and then I can't use it for other things, which will slowly cause it to hit a limit and then cause it to deflate again as money incoming decreases as well. So it really does depend on what the Federal Reserve decides to do. Another thing to remember is each one of these dual lands, you got to remember that there is a lot of supply of them. It just depends on how much they get tied up. It's the same thing that's happening with housing. The reason why housing prices are going up is one, because of interest rates, but two, there's only like 3 houses that are being sold anywhere around the world at any time right now. I'm joking. It's a lot more than that. But what I'm saying is supply and demand is a very big deal. Right now, there just is not much supply, so the demand is high. It's the same thing for lumber. It's the same thing for a lot of these metals, except for gold and silver, because there really is not much supply. And that's the second issue. If there isn't much supply, then the price is going to go up. So we're going to have to see if this inflation that's coming out from the US 10-year, it's pretty scary, because you got to remember that the percentage increase is 300%. From when it dropped down to 0.5 to when it got up to 1.5, that's a lot further than when it drops down from 1.5. So 214, 224%. But if I went the other way around, 66%, 70%. So you got to remember that the way that it drops is way more of an impact. So when you calculate a price increase or a rate increase, you got to go by the fact that, oh my God, from the middle of 10th of August, when gold hit its peak, we have gone up by 224%. So gold, 10th of August, I bet is when it hit its peak. At 3rd of August. Okay, yeah. Gold is a bit smart. It got ahead of itself. There's a chance that when it gets down to around about 1675, it'll probably bounce and go back up again. But it really does depend on what the economy does. I wouldn't put any bets against the fact that the dollar might actually increase in value as well. And along with interest rates, and things will get really crazy really fast. So I'm getting distracted. All I wanted to say in this video was I want to talk about biflation and the fact that biflation is a really it's a real thing that can happen to asset classes right now, which is certain assets will inflate, certain will deflate, and depending on how the governments around the world act, you can get some benefits either way. Anyway, let me know below if you think something else is happening. Investopedia is a great source for all of these. I'm only talking about this in the source of assets and commodities and collectibles, but you got to remember that when money is liquid around the world, like when there is a lot of money being pushed into the world, there will be people that are just going to make it a smart decision. Assets, collectibles, they're all smart decisions. So anyways, let me know guys what you think about this, and see you guys next time.